Hi, and welcome to another episode of Covering Your Health with Evelyn Erives, presented by IEHP. Oh my gosh, season two, episode two. Here we are, all ready to go. Now, I love the holidays, but I have to tell you, when you get to the holidays, for some, this is a very, very challenging time in people's lives, including myself. It can stir up a lot of emotions, especially for those who just recently lost a loved one or are still coping with some sort of loss. So let's face it, there are little things in our daily lives that remind us of those things that we lost, the people, the animals, and such. Yet during the holidays, grief can sometimes sneak up on you, right? Or hit you the hardest. Maybe some of those favorite holiday traditions, watching a movie, decorating the tree, reminds you of those who aren't physically here anymore and that grief. And well, we need to navigate that, don't we? That's why we brought in the perfect person to help with that. Today, we're joined by Sandy Wyman, Vice President of Mission at Inland Empire Health Plan, who is going to help us talk about how we can navigate the grieving process during the holidays. Sandy comes to the conversation with decades. Wait till you hear her story. Decades of experience as a critical care nurse, chaplain, and a mission coach. So we have quite the expert on hand to talk through a very complex subject. I know that you'll benefit from. I know I'm going to benefit from this, and I hope you will too.
Welcome to Covering Your Health, a wellness podcast dedicated to covering all areas of living a healthy and happy lifestyle. From healthy hearts to understanding health plans and everything in between, each episode will provide you with a better understanding of managing your health, preventative care, and staying on the right path for your family's wellness journey. The Covering Your Health podcast is presented by IEHP. Now, your host, Evelyn Erives.
Okay, well, let's get started. Hi, Sandy. How are you?
I'm doing well, Evelyn. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for
Good.
joining me. So excited. So, this is episode two of our new season. So, I'm really, really blessed because we had a whole full season of amazing stuff. And we're already starting off with a bang and very happy to have you here. I want to talk a little bit about you and your background. I love to get a little insight.
Sure,
How did you find yourself in this line of work?
sure. You know, I've probably in one way or another been in this line of work since I was 4 or 5 years old. It seems
Wow.
like I've always been drawn to people or creatures who are suffering in
Oh.
times of crisis or sadness or grief. And then, of course, decided to take nursing going into college. And so Um, the roles that I've had and again what I've done have really been in deepening a sense of the joy of serving others, fostering hope, meaning, purpose in the work and in the organization, and and just kind of a focus on healing. There can't always be a cure, but there can always be healing and
Yeah.
bringing people hope.
Oh, I love that. I love that. What is it, do you think, when you were so young that was there a situation that happened for you, or was it just a nurturing ability you had right away?
You know, I come from a line of ministers in our faith tradition, and fortunately, just really healthy faith tradition in terms of our family, with just
Yeah.
a heart for service. So, family stories and
Mm.
legacy, and I had grandparents who were missionaries in Burma, India, and so
Oh,
forth.
wow.
And so I grew up on these stories of courage and faith and service
Yeah.
and loving others through what we do. But probably I remember the first time I experienced just such sadness was putting down our dog Fifi when I was 5. And she had hepatitis and she'd fall over all the time. And I went with my dad to the
Hmm.
vets. And while I didn't go in, I stayed in the waiting room. We stayed in the waiting room. It was just I remember having a lot of thoughts about that as a little person and just I don't know. I've just always had, the meaning of the name Sandra, which is my, given name, is helper of mankind. So there's
Oh
there's no no
my.
no pressure there to
Ah,
to show up in that way, but that's really kind of been my life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's impressive. Oh my gosh. And that's funny that you looked that up to see because you know what is funny? Our families do things to us, right? They inspire things in us, they change our
Right.
paths. Yours started with a name. You didn't even know
I, yeah,
it.
that's right. That's right. I think I was a teenager when I looked that up and I said, well, that resonates with how I feel inside and who I want to be.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And family stories, especially with your grandparents' story and all of
Mhm.
that. It's in your blood. It really
It is
is.
very true.
Wow. Well, okay,
Very
so let's
true.
talk about your role at IEHP and its mission to help serve not just as the health plan members, but the entire region. How do you do that? Tell me a little bit about that.
Right, right. Well, I've had this role for a couple of years. I've been at IEHP for 5 years. All of
Mm-hmm.
my career has really been on the acute side of healthcare. So hospitals or health systems. I've been a critical care nurse and specialty in palliative care and hospice. I've been a chaplain for years. I'm a credentialed coach, but the last many years have been in leadership roles for mission integration, organizational culture, some leadership development. And so coming to IHP, our phenomenal CEO, Jared McNaughton, has such a heart for people and for serving the underserved and so forth, and really wanted to establish more intentionally a mission-minded focus and values-based work that we do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
IHP has always been a phenomenal place with a strong sense of mission. In its 28 years, it's had this mantra of doing the right thing. We serve 1.5 million members and contract with over 8,000 providers and 42 hospitals. And I
Wow.
was amazed when I
Wow.
came. First of all, didn't realize how complex and multi-layered a health plan is,
Yeah.
but very impressed at IHP with people's sense of calling and purpose and dedication to this work. And many of our employees were IEHP members. And so
Yes.
then they come back and they give back. So this in our work, I have 4 mission coaches who work with me. I hired them in and we title that. A couple of them are clinicians. We work with leaders and teams and even externally with our community business partners and with providers or hospitals who are interested in strengthening their cultures of mission and lived
Mm-hmm.
values in the organization. People are, especially coming out of the pandemic, but have always been in healthcare hungry to come back to remembering what brought them to this work and to retread their tires and to help cultivate resilience. And that's what we do.
Man, that is a big undertaking for the record. Like that is a lot. I feel like that's even more added pressure on you post pandemic because of
Right.
the sense of need, right? For the sense to center again. Yeah.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm glad you used that word center. We kind
Mhm.
of come from a concept, our mission statement is we heal and inspire the human spirit. And
Yeah.
then we talk about a center for the human spirit, which is really our heart and
Yeah.
working from our heart. And so, yeah, I like your use of that word center.
I feel like it was the right thing just based on what you said.
You go.
Well, now, how did you get involved in this line of work as a critical care nurse prior? We all know that grief is never easy, but you took it a step further and were a chaplain. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I had about 10 years as an ICU nurse. Some of those 2 or 3 years were working in the emergency department. So I was working right at the bedside and close with patients and families who are experiencing trauma and crisis, life change. Grief is really living in the disparity of how it is and how we would like it to be. And so people would come into the hospital, and not only some of them experience the end of their life, and so walking with families through that, but
Hmm.
also just loss of hopes and dreams and life changing because of surgeries and accidents and illnesses and so forth. And so grief is universal, and I just was somehow, again, naturally drawn to people experiencing that. And you'd see me off in the corner, sort of sitting with the family and having those kind of conversations. How is this impacting your life? How are you doing? What kind of resources do you have? And so forth. So um, I along about 1993, before I decided to take chaplaincy, I lost my middle child, my 7-year-old son, Trevor, to an inoperable brain tumor.
Oh my goodness.
And so I was finally sort of at that point, I'd only lost two, maybe very elderly grandparents. It was just a nice benediction at the end of their life. But Trevor had never even been sick, and he just was just so loving and thoughtful and kind. I was looking forward to seeing who he'd be when he grew up. But going through that experience, which was such a crucible, um, felt very called to chaplaincy to be able to spend more dedicated time
Mm,
with people, really
mhm.
exploring meaning and hope and purpose and spirituality and people of all faiths or none. And that's kind of how I began to move into those spaces.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so sorry. I know that
Thank
that
you.
those are wounds that don't heal. Those are things that stay with you forever and ever. Let's talk about grief. You obviously have been there yourself. What is the nature of grief? What are the key concepts that you want us to know?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, grief is universal and it's natural and it's necessary. To heal, we must feel. And so
Mm,
it's not
hmm.
an illness to get over or a problem to solve. And
Right.
it's actually something we can't really go around because we'll carry it with us. It'll show up as illness or disease later in our life or high blood pressure or what have you,
Mm,
because we hurt much because we love much. So, I mean,
yeah.
to live any other way, we'd have to be rocks and stones, right? So, um, it's natural, it's necessary. None of us experience it in the same way. Men and women experience it generally quite differently. Um, and no one can ever know what someone else is experiencing. I could meet a mother who lost a son from the same kind of brain tumor, who was the same age and died on the same day of the same month, and I don't have a clue how she feels.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Right.
it's so important for people to know that because one of the least helpful things we say to people when they're grieving is, I understand how you feel. So we can say, I understand what it was for me,
Hmm.
but I
Hmm.
can't imagine what it must be like for you,
Right.
right?
Nobody is the
Um,
same.
yeah. And so, we lay a lot of expectations on each other and on people on how to move through it. But unless you're still in your robe and not eating and have isolated, 6 months later, every other way to move through it is normal. Some people move through it. And it's more challenging because grief is layered on. There may be many losses. We saw that through COVID. We had one of our editors that works in marketing at IEHP lost 9 family members to COVID in 5 months.
Oh my God.
He said, Sandy, next Thanksgiving, half of our family will be around the table. So, so there's such a thing as complicated grief, and one of the ways that takes place is again just layered on over time. There's something called disenfranchised grief, where there are griefs that are not publicly sanctioned, socially sanctioned. People feel like they have to keep it to themselves, and that just adds on to the weight, right, that people carry. So whether it gets integrated eventually as a strength and wisdom, or maybe as a bitterness over time, has everything to do with the story we tell ourselves
Hmm.
about what it is, the meaning that we give it, and the support that we seek.
You hit on one thing specifically that um, resonated with me. When you see someone going through something and you instantly want to turn it into something that you felt before, right? That you
Right.
felt. But so when you say things like, I know how you're feeling, it discredits how they're feeling,
That's right.
right?
That's right. We mean well. People mean
Right.
well,
Yeah,
but they
I
tend,
don't think it's on purpose by any means.
no, no, they really do mean well, but the things we say often tend to want to make us feel more comfortable.
Right.
And
Right.
and so the thing is, the person who is grieving, um, for example, people are afraid to say the name of the one who died. Well, the person who's grieving thinks about it all the time.
Right.
And they often would like someone, to just say, you know, um, I'm here if you want to talk. One of the things is probably doesn't work well is to ask people when they're in the throes of grief, let me know what you need.
Oh, yeah.
People don't know what they need. They're overwhelmed. They're in early stages of just trying to adjust to the
Hmm.
reality of it.
Hmm.
And so we don't want to put that burden on them. I had about 8 ladies from our church who broke in, if you will, to our house about 4 weeks after Trevor died, found all of our bills and paid everything.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
rather than ask, I would never have told them to do that or ever, been able to answer in that way, but it was so helpful. And so, the best thing is to just simply strike out and do something. If it's invasive or not helpful, the person will let you know, but it just feels good to know that people are wanting, to be of help. Or sometimes we make statements like, well, if I had a nickel for every time people had said to me, Sandy, at least you have two other children.
Oh
As,
no.
as if you had 100 children, that would be a comforting
Oh
comment.
my goodness.
Again, meaning well, but anytime we say at least anyway, we've just diminished, everything that came
Oh
before,
yeah. Oh,
and
that's
and
for
a
sure.
person's really their right to feel, or the word should, right? Um, or things like you're strong, you'll move through this,
Mm.
or so many others have experienced this too, or some people spiritualize it, and it's not time to do that when the grief is raw and so forth. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
silence is sometimes the best gift we give people, just to come
Right.
alongside and cry with them, and you know, yeah,
And just be there and just be,
and
you
just
could,
and
you could
just
even
be
just
there.
sit there, sit in it with them.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. We've heard many times there are stages to grief.
Mm.
What are some of those stages?
Yeah, it's interesting when Elizabeth Kubler-Ross many years ago identified these 5 stages. They were actually meant to be for the active dying process when we come to the end of our life. And
Hmm.
somehow they
Hmm.
got converted into the grieving process. So
Oh,
they're not,
interesting.
yeah, they're not linear. They're circular, and we pass through them a lot, especially in the first year with
Mm.
anniversaries and with so forth. And so we most of us have heard we begin with shock and disbelief. I mean, it's just like being in an earthquake and total disbelief. You can't get your mind around it. And sometimes I'll hear people say, "Well, it's been 4 weeks and my sister's just in denial." And I say, no, you can maybe name something denial 6 months from now, but not right now. She's in shock and disbelief and trying to get your mind around, what's taking place. Then there's anger, and then we come to discouragement. Sometimes people call that depression. It may or may it may be over time and months and months and months. It can become clinical depression, but we're just sad, and we have a right to be sad for as long as we're sad. And then there's sort of a stage that was about bargaining, sort of whether it's with God or whomever, just say, if you do this, then I'll do that, or I
Yeah.
promise I'll always if dot dot dot, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then we come to a place of acceptance, which really is just moving into the reality. For me, for example, with my son, after about 4, 5, 6 weeks, it was like, oh, he's really not gone to summer camp. He's really not here. Right.
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
just accepting the reality. Now, what I love is that David Kessler, Kessler, and you can go to his website, great resource. And he's got courses that people can take, and he has a support group people can be a part of. But he wrote a book that came out a couple years ago called Meaning, the Sixth Stage of Grief. And he
Mm.
was actually a protege and a colleague of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And we've heard him on lots of talk shows and things. He's really brilliant. And so that sixth stage of grief is meaning. And I wrote myself a note here so I could say this right. It's that in time we find personal purpose and hope and a way to bless others out of our experience and help them
Mm.
find meaning. What he says is each person's grief is as unique as their fingerprint. But what everyone has in common is that no matter how they grieve, they share a need for their grief to be witnessed. I love that. And that doesn't mean needing someone to try and fix it or reframe it or lessen it for them. It's the need for someone to be fully present to the magnitude of their loss without judging it or trying to put a silver lining around it.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I
really
see
like
it.
that.
I do
Really like
too.
that.
Yeah, yeah. And that also could be, the meaning could also be those support groups that you see for so many people
That's
after the
right.
fact, years later.
Yes,
That kind of other way of finding, you know,
for sure.
putting what you've gone through into action.
Yeah, and I wouldn't ever want people to think that, there's an expectation that everyone ought to find a support group or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Different ways of healing are for different people. The important thing is that we don't just try to lock it and stuff it away.
Yeah.
Now, men tend to process their grief more internally and more quietly. They
Mm-hmm.
might go out and shoot 18 holes of golf with three buddies and never say a word, but it's therapeutic for them. Women tend to, these are big generalizations, but women tend to process um, in relationship and relationally. So with friends or whoever, and to talk about it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if we can just give each other a lot of grace in our marriages and partnerships when we experience grief, because we will do it differently.
Yeah. Each
Mhm.
one of us, no couple's going to be the same either going
No,
through that
no.
process. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
What are some of the myths associated with grief?
Oh, that's a great question because they certainly are there.
Hmm.
Um, Probably one of them that comes to mind is that people just need to get over it.
Oh, yeah.
They need to get over there,
Yeah.
suck it up. Not that everyone would be cruel enough to say suck it up, but there is no standard time for getting over it.
Right,
There's
right.
only moving through it because it's part of life, and then working it, I like to say, working it into the soil of our life over time. So out of that grows beautiful things for ourselves and for others. And that people have a right to be sad for as long as they're sad.
Hmm.
Another one is that tears are a sign of weakness.
Oh, yeah, that's a big
That's a
one.
myth. And so tears are really about feelings we just don't have words for. And they carry out toxins. They have a physiological purpose in our life.
Well, there you
And
go.
so sometimes boys in our cultures and different cultures are cultured not to cry. That's not being a
Hmm.
man. But nothing could be farther from the truth. They've just kind of been cultured and raised that way. But tears they matter. Another one is that the griever again feels greater sadness when we talk about it. And
Mm.
that's another myth. Um, because again, most people are thinking about it every day. And the best thing is to ask people and say, what's most helpful and comforting for you? Would you like to talk about this, or does it fit more for you right now to not talk about it because I want to
Right.
be helpful,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And just
yeah.
simply ask people is so good. Um, Another myth is that if someone's grieving, the best thing to do is leave them alone.
Mm, mm.
Um, so we don't want to bombard people, but we don't want to withdraw either.
Yeah.
Just a card or a text or a brief phone call kind of lets them know we're thinking of them. Um, and like I said, just strike out and do something. And the other myth is that time heals all wounds. There's nothing magic about time, actually. It's what we do with the time and how we move through it. And maybe the last one I'd mention is I've heard people say, well, you can't really help anyone in grief. They just have to grieve. And I say yes, yes, you can.
Mhm.
What helps the most is not explanation, but consolation. People
Mm.
just need love with skin on it.
Yeah,
Frankly, they need to know that someone will stay and will care without trying to fix it or judge it or make it seem like it's something that's wrong with people.
right.
Um, and again, our silent presence is almost always the best thing we can give.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. You talked about the physiological part of tears, right? There's actually a benefit.
Yes.
You get rid of toxins. So what are other ways that grief impacts us physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually?
Yeah. Well, for any of us who've experienced, and of course, remember there are many kinds of grief
Right.
and many kinds of loss,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, not only the loss through death, there's a loss of health and hopes and dreams and um, pets and relationships and so forth. And sometimes even getting married and having kids, there's still grief in that because you're having to release something and say goodbye to one chapter, right, to move into and form a new story and a new
It's
chapter.
true.
And there's
That's true.
there's some grieving involved in that. But when we think of the loss, particularly that's most profound through losing each other and losing someone dear to us, or even a pet, um, I mean, physically, all these things you've mentioned, grief is very draining.
Mm.
So, lots and lots of fatigue. It can affect our appetite, affect our sleep,
Mm-hmm.
our energy level, our just our interest in doing things for a while. I caution people who have a faith community that people not coming to church after a loss in their life is not a lack of faith.
Right, right.
They're exhausted, right? And so just make sure and offer gently what you can. Send them a card, let them know you're thinking of them. But there shouldn't be any expectations of how people need to be and show up um, during that time emotionally. I mean, nothing like grief invites us to ask life's deeper questions. What's it all about? What does it mean? Where's God in all of this? Spiritually, we wrestle, or whatever our tradition is.
Right, right.
What have I done? Am I being punished?
Am I being punished? I've heard
Am
that
I
one a
being
lot.
punished? I can't tell you as a chaplain how many times I heard people say that
Oh,
from their beds, and it just broke my heart.
oh no.
And I just thought, who taught you that, the higher power is, watching, policing us to find
Yeah.
ways to do a gotcha, in our life. It's just very,
Right.
very sad. But emotionally, you're all over the page. And so you're up one day, down the next. You're laughing one day and feeling guilty about it, and then you're driving your car and a song comes on the radio, and you had to do this and pull off to the side of the road and just cry,
Yeah, yeah.
which is perfectly all right and good to do. But grief comes in waves of an ocean. There's no like time and sometimes seemingly reason to it. It just comes when it comes,
Mm-hmm.
and it's good to let it sort of do that. Um, so there's long lists of things that we can experience in all the ways you mentioned, and they're all normal. They all tend to pass with gentleness and compassion for ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
support and time. If they linger over a long period of time, I think people should probably watch their loved ones who are grieving and friends, but for themselves seek professional help if they don't feel good about themselves, if they just seem constantly out of control, stressed out, foggy headed for weeks and weeks on end. I'm talking
Right.
about.
Right, right.
um,
Serious, very serious.
that's right. If they fear harming themselves or others, if they have repeated losses in their life, it's probably good to find a good counselor
Mm,
to talk with just to help sort those through. Um, and if they continually seek comfort in alcohol, drugs, other potentially harmful activities, it feels like an escape for a time and it numbs the feelings, which are all there. They don't go
yeah.
away.
No.
And it just compounds the issue because now you've got that. Um, and if the support of wise friends and family is not enough, or if people are isolating themselves, that's what we want to look out for,
Mm-hmm.
especially over a protracted period of time. Yeah.
Yeah. We could talk forever about this. I feel like we could talk for hours about it. But you kind of brought it up. The next thing I was going to ask, what should people do? If is there professional help, go to resources available?
Yes.
Grief counselors, is something the first thing that comes to my
Yes.
mind. What kind of resources? I know IEHP, if we have some of those resources as well. Will you speak to that?
Our um, Our behavioral health and member-facing departments at IHP are able to direct people
Mm-hmm.
to resources in the community. There are lots of online resources. I mentioned one of them, David Kessler.
Mm-hmm.
You can look up Grief Share, which may be a little more leaning toward people with faith traditions, but there is so much available. There are tons of books now that you just go on Amazon, and there are some very good books on grief and working through grief. Another author who was a longtime friend and has since passed is H. Norman Wright, or Wright, wrote probably 25 books on grief
Oh,
and loss.
wow.
And before that was a marriage and family therapist. And so there's a lot of ways in which to do that. Seek out trusted friends and make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who are positive, who love you, who care for you genuinely, and are not laying a lot of expectations and shoulds on you. You don't need that at this time. Make sure you're getting lots of sleep and drinking a lot of water because grieving is dehydrating. So do the things that nurture and strengthen you, time in nature, music that nurtures you, taking a hot bath, journaling, getting a massage is really helpful. Um, and just, let your memories over time, let your memories be a source of comfort. Love never dies. There's a quote that I love that says, "Death can never take away more than love leaves behind."
Oh, I
There's
love
just a lot
that.
that we get to keep, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the task of grieving is really sorting through what am I saying goodbye to? Because you never say goodbye to the person or
Hmm.
the relationship. But for example, with Trevor, my son, it was maybe 3 or 4 months after. It can be helpful. Someone suggested I read writing a goodbye letter, not right away at all, but it was just goodbye to the things we can no longer do, like he learned how to ride his bike in the cemetery where he's now buried, right? And
Wow.
so goodbye
Yeah.
to doing that. Goodbye to making cookies together. Goodbye to, catching bugs and, but
Mm.
not goodbye to the relationship. You're just releasing what can no longer be, but you are absolutely holding forever in your heart. And you'll find that the relationship and the memories continue to
Hmm.
grow actually
Yeah.
over time.
Oh, you're making me emotional. I literally, my eyes are
Well,
welling up.
that's just because you have a heart.
I, I was just thinking, like with loss, grief is so different for everybody, and you're right, it comes in waves. And when you said the quote, that quote like struck a chord with me because it is so true how love endures. It just does. It lives on forever and ever and ever. And I think about my grandma all the time, and I think about how I see her sometimes, and and it makes me laugh because I didn't grieve right away with her. I
Yes.
was
Yeah. Yeah.
really sad, but I didn't grieve right away. And now I sometimes find myself grieving years later, which is
Oh,
so
it's
interesting.
beautiful, but it really is what it is a flavor of loving.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not you're just missing her, right? And
Hmm.
missing what can no longer be. And
Yeah.
that's what grief is, but it is not, again, it's not something to get over. It's just part of loving.
You know what's so funny? Andrew Garfield, I don't know if you saw that online with
Part
Elmo.
of it. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. And he sort of said something to that was just so heartbreakingly sweet. Like it was, at least I miss her, and that makes me happy because I
Right.
I had that kind of relationship with her that I get to think about all of those moments again.
I love
And
that. And if I
oh,
can add one thing to that, the only
yeah.
thing I'd caution people is that sometimes people feel as if the only way they can connect with their loved one they're missing is in a place of pain.
Oh, true. Yeah.
So we can almost choose to stay in pain and
Yeah.
suffering, and a depleted state, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
that's different than just missing someone,
Right.
right?
Right.
And remembering and loving and I mean, and make anniversaries. So on Trevor's birthday, I fix his favorite foods. I have chicken nuggets, cherry pie, broccoli, and French fries,
I love
right?
that.
And often, a couple times, I've planted a tree somewhere in his memory,
Oh, yeah.
and so take some anniversary times and mark them
Yeah.
in time and have them become a tradition. And
Yeah.
especially if you have other children, the most challenging thing is my oldest was I have a son who was 10 at that time, and Trevor was 7, and my daughter was 2.
Wow.
And I will tell you, it took me 9 months, almost a year, before I could take pictures of the family because
Oh,
Trevor was missing and it wasn't whole. Um, and then you want to be careful that the person who died, that somehow they don't overshadow everyone else in the family who's here,
yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
especially other children.
Yeah.
They need
A
attention.
10-year-old, I'm
They're here
sure.
today,
And they're
right?
probably grieving in their own way as
And they're
well.
grieving in their way
Yeah.
too. So you
Yeah.
have to invest in them. And for children, keep their routines as much as possible and just remind them of how much you love them. And
Yeah.
kids take, for the most part, under 8, 7 years of age, they take their cues from the adults
Yeah.
and as to how safe everything is. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, this has been such a powerful episode. You're so wonderful. You s- you speak so eloquently about everything, all of this with such great grace and such great information. I have another, well, I want to wrap this up because I don't want to take too much more of your time. But I have a question for you. Um, I always like to end our podcast with three key takeaways. Can you give me three key
Hmm.
takeaways that we can utilize today, or utilize down the road? Maybe have as
Right.
a utility
Uh,
in our tool belt.
that's beautiful practice that you have. I love that. I think that probably number one would be compassion for yourself, is where it all starts.
Yes.
We tend to connect to the life in other people to the extent we're connected to the life in ourselves. So,
Mhm.
um, you know, so be your own best friend,
Yes.
and
I
be
like that.
compassionate. Yeah, be your own best friend. And what does that look like?
Mhm.
Because sometimes our self-talk isn't that way.
Oh, that's
Um,
true.
let's see, probably number two would be there's no right way to move through grief. There can be healthier ways over time, but no right way, and that everyone experiences it differently. So lots of grace for yourself, a lot of grace for others. And then just really lean on trusted, positive people in your life and spaces, and learn the blessing of receiving. I know oftentimes for women who are grieving, they're so used to giving and pouring into other people and taking care of the family emotionally
Yeah.
and all the rest. And sometimes we're not as good as women at receiving. But this is a time for receiving.
Yeah.
Let others do for you. They need the blessing of giving to you.
Hmm. Hmm. And I'm going to also add to my little tool belt here the words not to use.
Yeah.
The at least and the
Yes.
shoulds. We're not using those
Yes.
words.
Yeah, we could almost take those out of the English language and we'd
We don't need any of those.
probably be better off.
You are totally right. Why do I need to use the word at least? The words at least. Really, you don't.
Yeah. No, just choose to do what is best to do and get rid of that because that
Yeah.
just adds shame.
A whole
We don't
level.
need
It really
we don't
does.
need that.
Well, thank you so much. You have been a joy. Thank you, Sandy.
Oh, it's been
Maybe
my
we can,
privilege.
yeah, maybe we can have you back on. I feel like I had even like a laundry list of questions for you, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So thank you very much, for being on the podcast.
Oh, it's been my pleasure and delightful to be with you. So thank you.